Hi, everybody. I'm Topher Kinsella, CEO of Watershed Therapeutics, and I'm joined by two people who have a lot of experience investing in companies. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Thank you. I'm Karin Leire. I'm investment director in Segulah Medical. We're a Swedish-based VC company investing in late-stage medtech.
Hi, my name is Thom Rasche. I'm partner at Earlybird Health. We are a venture capital provider from Germany in Berlin. We are priding ourselves to be the only fund in Europe, if not in the world, who has public health insurances as cornerstone investors, which is rather unique, at least in Europe.
So topic of our discussion is the only patient outcomes that matter for investment. So when people come to you and they razzle-dazzle you with the size of the market or the opportunity or the size of the unmet need, when does the patient outcome actually pop into that conversation? Like, are you really motivated by a 10% improvement, or is it about the patient pain point? Like, what are the things that actually grab you and make you really perk up and pay attention to that pitch?
Want to start?
Well, happy to do so. So, as I said, we have public health insurances, so patient outcome is very high on our list. It's probably going to be right at the beginning of the question. How much will you improve it? And when it's a 10% improvement, I'm probably shaking my head because 10% is within margin of error usually in the stuff we measure. So it needs to be dramatic, 30, 40, 50% better than what you have today. But the question really is, how do you, one, define patient outcomes? I.e., is it site of care? Is it length of stay? Is it less pain? What is it really you are trying to define? But my next question would automatically be is, how do you prove it? So what's the way how you can show that you actually do improve patient outcome that actually makes sense from a clinical perspective? So next to the question of patient outcome, my question will be the clinical trials, the size of it, and what you need to actually prove your point. I think that is really important. About 50% of our deal flow is in diagnostics, all kinds, be it the modern digital tech ones or the traditional ones with fluids, always to determine diseases earlier, differently, faster, all of those things. And again, I would be always asking, so what's the point? I.e., what the therapeutic impact you're going to have with that new diagnostics, and will you change people's life with that at the end of the day? That's the way we approach it. I know those are usually questions people cannot answer. I realize that. But I do know that you have to think it through and actually say what the end game will be. Plans change, I realize that too, but at least have a thought process on that.
So in the diagnostic space, there's a lot of companies here that are in diagnostics, and that's a tricky spot to be in because you're claiming that you're going to get your technology works and you can detect a thing or state a thing, but it's not the therapeutic. So if the diagnostic cannot directly generate the outcome, do you ever run into situations where the technology absolutely worked, they did what they said they did, but it did not move the needle for the patient outcome that they wanted?
And so, I mean, point of care diagnostics, for instance, is a good example on those things. Is like, you really have to ask yourself, is a point of care diagnostic improving care by getting the information right there and then? If it's an infectious disease, you can argue this because you can actually have a therapy acting right there and then. If it's just another diagnostic, which you can do as well and as good as in the central lab, and it doesn't really matter whether you have a day or two later, then I would question this because those labs are highly efficient, very cost efficient and all of that. So point of care diagnostics is one of those examples where I say I'd be very careful to look at those if they really make a difference to people's life, i.e. we need to know it now or soon rather than wait another day or two where you can get it. And most of the things are process questions. So it's established processes within a healthcare system where if you change the processes, you would get the answer as fast. It's just a new technology was trying to overcome an established process in the healthcare system, which you can change the process, and then you would get the information as fast.
And tying on to that, I think you have to we in detail evaluate how many stakeholders is it actually that needs to be convinced about changing a standard of care or a way of operating as you introduce something new. If you to build on to your example, there will be places where they will actively work against you to implement this improvement, even though it's an improvement, because you're changing something that's functioning for them today.
So how should companies handle it when, there's some point of care diagnostics that I think absolutely prove that they can detect the thing that they say they do. And they'll make the argument that this information will be valuable. The reason we don't have a care pathway is because everybody does not have this information. So things like early detection of a AV fistula in trouble. This is an unmet need you see all the time and struggles for investment. Grading and staging of concussion severity is another one that struggles. Early detection of a diabetic foot ulcer. So what is it about, so if you're a company that's focused on one of these things, what is the reason why this doesn't move forward from a patient outcome standpoint or from attracting investment? And what should those companies change about the way they tell that story or how they approach it?
There are just simply too many things within healthcare that are bad, that are accepted as being bad, or pain that is a pain level that is accepted, where no decision maker is actively working to reduce that pain level. So having then in that specific situation, a 10% reduction in pain level is will not be the driver for us as investors, because we need to see the, in the end, the business case that will drive the value of the company. So for that situation, it's valuable as a company to present which are, and rather detailed actually, which are the different activities that we are going to do over the coming years to drive the change needed for my solution to be a must within the organizations. Just like you have, penalties for readmission into hospital, for example. How can you tie your solution product to such decision making so that you can, in addition to your, the given, how it improves health, how you also can drive implementation of it?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, you have to see us as a middleman. So we're managing other people's money. They have the trust and faith in us and say, you will be investing those companies which will be producing a good exit at some point in time. So you have to look at it from a back. So if you look at a diagnostic company and say, okay, what will this company have to show before they believe jointly, this is exitable. In diagnostics, we've learned you need to have revenue traction. So no revenue traction, i.e. validating your business model, no exit, which we know is a costly endeavor. It usually is a little bit of trial and error until you figure out your strategy and all of that. So it will take time, number one. And if you look at, for instance, stroke detection, which is actually a good example because there's a number of companies out there selling devices or trying to develop devices which gives you the ability to determine whether a patient had a stroke or not very early on, even in an ambulance. Now you need to look at that market and says, who is the purchaser in ambulances? It's usually the fire department or anybody of those guys. Will they be investing in a company which actually has an early stroke detection device? Even though you could argue that patient outcome is going to be improved because you do know that once you actually have figured out that they had a stroke, that you better bring them into stroke unit rather than to general hospital emergency room. But the problem is in that market, it's really, really difficult to get a foothold and actually get that revenue traction I described early on, because there's no money in those areas to be made, and the decision making is really fragmented and spread out. So you really have to think about the whole process, having the commercial experience as well as what it will take to actually get that commercial traction, which in particular in diagnostics, I think you do need to have. I think in other indications, you can actually sell the technology more on its promise rather than on the traction. There where you say like, okay, does this area have money? How's decision making being made? Will this change the needle? Even though you could argue that if it is adopted, it will improve patient outcome pretty dramatically, actually. But getting there is painful, will take a lot of time, and maybe need to change the system actually to a certain degree. And you will be surprised in Europe and in the US, even though we have very different healthcare systems, but the fundamental way of how things are adopted are rather similar. They are not that different at the end of the day, because again, being back with my stroke detection device, it's being used and utilized in all the countries in a very similar way. And the people who purchase it are different ones, but acting the same way.
But this is also the beauty of operating in the medtech space. It's, comparing to pharma or biotech, where it's super strict and all the different phases and what you are to do, and you can't do anything outside of that. That's what you can do in medtech. So you can really make that plan for your product or solution that's unique to you, and that means that in some cases, if we take your example, it's most probably people that are completely outside of the healthcare chain that are to make the decision, and it could be a really simple, not even health economic, but economical study showing the journey from the patient's home to when they leave the hospital type of journey that won't cost you very much, but will very clearly describe the value of what you're doing. And I think that's something that is, as investor, that's what you evaluate a lot in the ability of the team to really maneuver these challenging hurdles that come all the time in understanding who am I to please.
So you talked about how, you're the shepherd of capital and you're a middleman between the entrepreneur who has the vision and ultimately the acquirer. And you gave an example of an acquisition target or an output where the patient outcome is not what they're going to get acquired on. It's going to be the revenue. The market has to prove it out. What comes to mind as patient outcomes that actually do drive acquisition prior to revenue? What are the things that in your industry or your particular focus that people sort of do not question? If you can demonstrate this, perfect.
I mean, it really depends on the indication. But if you, let's say, go in heart failure or any of those areas, I think if you can show and demonstrate in rather smallish trials that you actually change people's life by either having no admission into the emergency room, survival, when they have a short time horizon, you can actually go for that, which is a pretty strong endpoint, but it's rather rare you can actually pick that one. But I think there's a number of sub-endpoints you can look where if you can demonstrate that with your technology, that outcome will drive adoption there pretty severely. Now, there is an economical side to this because it has to fit into current, I would say, adoption patterns, be it cardiologists or any like that, where you say, okay, it fits in there. So the likelihood that somebody of the corporates can put that in their bag and add that to their bag is high, rather than needing to invent a new distribution channel to a new group of customers which nobody has access to. So I think that's all the thinking we are trying to blend in. Again, we're trying to look from the end. If the company is ready, what do they need to show that somebody, hopefully we can define it, and it hopefully should be more than one, that would say, if you can show that, then this is a potential acquisition target. Now, will that happen? You never know. We all know that the venture business is not only knowledge and expertise, it's a lot of to do with luck, whether you like this or not. But that's the analytics we do at the beginning. So we always look from the end.
No, I just want to say we also see quite a few companies where you enter the market with less claims than what you're aiming for with a product in order to build that revenue being asked for, and that's in many ways a street smart way of doing it, and in areas where there is, where there isn't a given outcome to work for, as for everything that's a class 3 device or more regulated products, that the outcome is already given, which one you're to work with. But for the other ones, it's beneficial to look at what has been done by your competitors, because your product is of course better than the competitors. So by using the same outcome that the competitor has done, you can piggyback on quite a bit and still show that you are a better choice than theirs.
And so, I think the important thing is we don't pretend that we know it all, because we don't. Then you get surprises like the Organox exit, where you say like, interesting, would I never anticipated this? Or when you look at Axonics as an exit, where you say, really have not thought that in urology you would actually be able to find those kind of exits. So it always shows and displays to you to say like, you really don't know everything. You have a list of assumptions, and they may not be right, and the entrepreneur may actually be right, not you. But that's okay. I think that's where all the discussions come, and where you have to figure it out. And again, do we pretend we know it all? No. How? I think actually the older you get and the more you're in the venture business, the more you learn you know nothing. Really, absolutely nothing.
And one thing to add, too often we come across device companies where the entrepreneur, shows the device, shows how obvious it is that this is a great product, and almost, don't feel that there is a need to actually prove that with any data, because it's so obvious when you see the product. Don't go down that path, because there are always decision makers. We work in a data-driven world, right? You need to have data points, regardless of which one it is. That's a critical one.
So for the entrepreneurs that are here who may pitch to either of you in the future, are there any patient outcomes that they tried to sell you on early on where you just think that's sort of inappropriate? So like as a seed stage or a Series A company, if somebody comes to you and says, the reason you should back us is because we're really going to improve quality, how do you respond to something like that?
It needs to be put into perspective in each of the cases. So I've seen many slides today and yesterday where you see the difference, but don't tell at all what's the impact of this difference for the patient, for the hospital system. To put it into context is what I'm missing out on quite often. So then you could almost have skipped it instead of showing something but not the why.
When you say quality, this is an actually interesting term because quality of life with patients. So the softer the endpoints are getting, the more critical we would be getting. So give you a couple of examples. For instance, all of the digital apps which go for ADHD, which go for depression, which go for any other anxieties is one area. The other one is quality of life for really severely diseased individuals, heart failure, certain stages, neuroclass 3 and 4. Then you have to go for the 8-minute walk test. You really need to be careful if you invest in those companies. I think that when you do that, you need to be convinced that the changes this technology is going to make is pretty dramatic. In particular, with any neuromodulation technologies, you need to be very careful about the placebo effect, because any trials you do in that fact, just by definition, if you have patients involved in that, will improve, regardless of whether the technology does anything or nothing. So all of those things, the more soft the endpoint is going to get, the more difficult will it be, or the higher the threshold will be in order to change patient impact. I think that's really, really important. And there are so many neuromod companies out there right now, and I guarantee you a number of them are sitting in this room even, where you really need to be careful on definition of your endpoints and making sure that the trial is powered big enough, is diversified enough, i.e. from the site perspective, to make sure that you get this effect as minimal as possible. It's never going to go away, but it's going to be, and that's the argument I would have. I mean, if you then start going and doing a 30 or 40 patient trial, it's not going to be sufficient. No way.
Earlier you mentioned that your career humbles you, and like most people, I think we all kind of learn from scars. Have you had an experience investing in a company where you really did believe in the technology, you thought the patient outcome was going to be great and drive an acquisition, and were surprised?
I can give you an example. It's not my investment, it's our investment, so it's from Earlybird. And I was actually the biggest critiquer of it. It has not had an exit yet, but it is amazing how it is developing, and it's a classic digital health company. You may know it, Oviva. Oviva is a nutritional consultancy company, founded actually in Switzerland, now active in Germany and in the UK, and starting to do some work in France, which is going to generate over 100 million euros in revenues this year. Unbelievable, and growing more than 100% every year on year. And I was the biggest critiquer on it, I have to admit, and I'm stunned how well they have executed. Now, it's not a classical device investment, I agree, but those things do happen. So,
one of the things you can't help notice is it's either a great signal or a bad signal when you see multiple companies going after the exact same goal. And you have to question, are they wrong about the unmet need, or are they wrong about the patient outcome they're going after, or are they wrong about the tech? And one of the ones that I have watched for years is non-invasive blood pressure monitoring. And I would have put this in the camp of, I'm not sure anybody's ever going to be successful there. But I find out that I get surprised. And you have a recent example of that, do you not? Can you share what drove you to look at that technology and reconsider?
Yeah, I can even tell you that I have a little bit of history with this, because I was part of the first non-invasive but occlusive blood pressure monitoring devices which were used in intensive care and operating theaters, a company called Criticon, which was owned by J&J way back when. And that's when I was involved. So I do have a little bit of background knowledge in this. And we invested in Actia and now Hilo, because actually, as you said, it's a very much of a data-driven spiel these days. Actia has a phenomenal wealth of data on their non-invasive blood pressure monitoring, and I think we are very convinced that the technology will hold up in its accuracy. Now, the next level of question is, how can you make sure that this is being used and utilized, not necessarily reimbursed, but actually utilized in the healthcare system? And we believe it can only work through the clinics, i.e. regulatory approval, FDA, as well as European approval. They have just received an FDA approval for their spot check measurement, but they will be shortly going, hopefully getting their approval for the 24-hour blood pressure monitoring. It's such a burden to society if you actually find a way that it is passively monitored easy. I think it has a chance to be adopted. Now the jury is out. We will see. I think, but we made the investment just recently, like a month ago or so. We're quite convinced that this technology has the ability to do that, to manage blood pressure much better than we have done in the past, with a very low threshold of adoption. And I think those ease of use, as well as the data they have with the regulatory path, those are the key components to make this a potential success.
But this must be, I don't know this specific case of yours, but it must be a case where you really trust in the team and you trust in their ability to scale this into something successful.
Absolutely.
Because but to your point on, when there's, I think we get some type some device that measures vital signs in different ways. I think we get one a week. So if you're in that space, you really need to be able to show why we are, why we will be able to be successful in this field, because no doubt that there is a need for an easy solution to the monitoring to ease the daily burden on healthcare staff. But how are you to work successfully to grow the business beyond your friend, not your friends of course, but your hospital friends, and scale it? That's challenging to evaluate.
This is a tricky question because at the end of the day, I think blood pressure, as we all know, is a really big burden on society. But you have to develop a technology which I think can be adopted by both physicians and patients easy on a low threshold. So any pads, sticky stuff, all of that stuff, I think is out. I think we know compliance is very low. People won't do it. Having a wristband potentially could work. Maybe even if it's integrated in your watch, even easier. So that's one side. That's the clinical side of the world. And then you look at things like Aura, the Aura ring, where you say like, what am missing as a medical device investor, conservative, looking at outcomes, all of those things, where you see like, okay, there is a company which just provides you with vital signs in a stupid ring, and they make 500 million in revenues. Are you scratching your head and say like, okay, I'm missing something here. Something doesn't add up in my mind. And that comes to my humbleness again to say like, okay, I guess we'll have to revisit our thinking and understand what our assumptions are and whether those are necessarily right. They're never right, by the way, or going into the right direction.
We have a mixed crowd, plenty of people here from the United States, plenty of people here from Europe. Those two health systems treat patient outcomes and their importance very differently. How do you counsel companies who have a thesis that says the reason you should invest in this is because, let's say, NHS is going to love us, but not specifically tailored to the U.S., or do you try to push as many companies as you're working with to go after the larger market? How do you balance those two things?
I guess what we in the evaluation, we would first evaluate if they actually know about these differences, because they don't always do. But then we have reimbursement systems that are very different in the US and in the different European countries, and I think to be able to I have one example of a Swedish company where the Swedish thesis used with the healthcare system is really based on patient health, whereas in their pitch in the US, it's about how you with their software can have more patients, more patients monitored in a day, so more revenue to the investor, essentially, not talking at all about the value it actually brings to the patient. And then for us as investors, where we put in our we say that we want to invest in companies that will improve global health as an overarching thesis. Sometimes that's actually, some of the pitches actually threaten that sometimes, because it gets more into a business than improving health. And then you need to think what's the uttermost important there. Yeah.
There's a distinct difference between investing in the US and Europe. In Europe, we are not worried about reimbursement because we believe if it changes people's life and you improve outcome, it will find its way into reimbursement.
True.
In the US, that's not the way. In the US, you have to look at reimbursement first, and will it have a chance for the physician to make money? If it doesn't, I wouldn't say it's a problem, it just adds time. So you need to look at whether there is not necessarily codes for it, but how easy is it to get one, or how easy it is for a physician population to actually make money on the product. That is not a consideration you have at all in Europe. Not at all. The physician in Europe alone has usually not that decision power to say, I'm buying it or not. It is driven by a different motive.
Up here, an investor of us said to me that when it comes to health tech, they only invest into companies where the value of the use is so high that it will stand alone, regardless of if there's reimbursement or not. I think that's an interesting thought to it. Not and by that, I guess, questioning if you're designing something purely to match the existing codes.
So, given the distinction, and that in the U.S., if the physician doesn't make money, it doesn't have. Well, you were very careful. You said it adds to the timeline. So, does that mean that for any startups that are trying to advocate for the patient benefit, is that stakeholder the physician is going to be treating? Are they the ultimate arbiter? So if I came to you and I said, like, I've got this survey, it's 100 potential patients, they all want our solution, our magical device, versus I came to you and I said 100 doctors want it. I have no information from the patients. Do you treat those two differently? Like, if I don't have the doctors, is it dead on arrival?
You really have to look at the individual cases. I mean, we are invested in a company, for instance, in the US, actually, I think Ted is here, in Shape Memory Medical, which treats aortic aneurysms. Do you have reimbursement for that device in it? No, you don't. But is the benefit you deliver to the patients so high that the physicians will regardless utilize it? Yes, it will. So if you look at individual cases, you would say, okay, if the impact is so dramatic that the likelihood that this will be adopted is quite high, I think then you pick it. You really have to look and take it into details and bits and pieces to say, can you do it? Can you not do it? What's your assumption in terms of the likely benefits you're delivering to the patients? I mean, if you look at AAA's, aortic aneurysms or false lumen, and all of those patients are in dire need, and the physicians are physicians, thank God, and actually using and utilizing the technologies, which in that case is best, even though it may not be reimbursed yet.
And specifically, if you had have then the added value of other outcomes that aren't patient related, but that improves the likelihood of use from the caregiver, like the usability or time saved by using it, then all those are drivers to increase use.
Are there any cases that come to mind where, let's say that your product does not involve the physician? Let's say it's solving a patient at home problem, or just a use case between, let's say, a tertiary caregiver and the patient. What are are patient outcomes enough to drive adoption of those technologies? I'm specifically thinking of, you see lots of companies coming up with very clever solutions for patient transfer. And you see these sort of evergreen, and you just kind of wonder, why is this problem not getting solved?
It's simple. There's no exits. It's a medical problem, and it's a problem for the caregivers. Completely agreed. No question. But there is no exits. Nobody buys this. It's a highly fragmented market, in particular for this transfer devices. A lot of local providers, some bigger ones, but very few. I mean, the hospital bed ones is actually starting to be a little bit more consolidated, but other than that, there's very few exits. So you weren't really getting into this. It's sad to say. It addresses a need, and there is a number of companies and technologies we see where I say, it really addresses something which is really, really needed. But if we can't get a fantasy around a potential exit, no matter what the company has done and no matter how well they have performed, then this is not a case for us, unfortunately.
I do think, though, to your point of your LPs, I think it's you have these cases where the insurance companies play an important part, and that is these cases are not for the transportation, but more for the home care products. That's where a buy-in from insurance companies can be your way forward.
And it's very local. So if our insurance companies would like it, then we have a German insurance company who likes it. Nice, good, but that's not sufficient at the end of the day. I mean, it's proving the case that there's a need, but it doesn't proving the case for an exit at the end of the day, which is okay, by the way. At times we actually help those companies to get financed in other ways, not through us, and get them on their feet in a more local manner. It's at least a solution for the company at the point.
So, unfortunately, the people that decide that they're going to start a company are made an initial decision to disagree with the world and proceed anyway against odds. So how do you give to a CEO who's aspiring to solve one of these problems the advice that, yes, you may be the first person to ever demonstrate an exit in this space, but it's incredibly fraught? I mean, how do you have to come into that often? How do you handle that moment?
I mean, at the end of the day, we are trying really to help those people when I believe they are addressing really a medical need, which is there. So, I mean, we have other means of giving them recommendations for private investors, for public money, for the insurances and all of those things. If we believe that there is really a need which is being addressed, then we help those people. But of course, time is limited. You can't do it to everybody. But if there's somebody where you say like, this is really clever, but it doesn't really fit our thesis, then we would engage. We usually do that. We always have, I would say, I don't know, I have like 5, 6, 7 pet projects, I call them, which are sitting in the drawer. The guy's calling me at times and asking for help and supervision and all of those. So this is quite normal.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for the conversation. We're over time, but this was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.